Okay, good morning from Brussels. It's 9:30 Brussels time. So I see we're up to over 400 online. I suspect we'll have a few more people joining us in the next coming meetings, but I suggest that we start this webinar. My name is Martin Penny, and I'm the Head of Unit for Communication in the Executive Agency for the ERC, and it's my pleasure to moderate this webinar this morning. So let me explain what we're going to do today. You may have seen already that we've had 2 webinars on YouTube explaining the changes in the work programme for 2026. They took place in July and in September, and if you haven't seen those, you can access those recordings directly from YouTube. That was really a questions and answers session on the changes in the work programme. This session is designed to be much more practical, much more hands-on, to give you practical guidance and advice on the whole application process, what you need to write in your application, how it's submitted, how it's evaluated, what you need to think about when you're thinking about the ethical dimension of your research when you're applying, and also how you look at the finances as well, so that you can be as well prepared as possible for the calls which are coming up and the calls which have already been launched. As you may be aware, the starting grant call will close in 3 weeks' time, and our consolidated grant will open tomorrow. So this session will focus on the 3 main individual grants: the starting grant, consolidated grant, and advanced grant. Some of you may have questions on our other grants, the proof of concept or the synergy grant. We're happy to take those questions, but we will focus this webinar on the 3 individual grants. I think in doing so, what we will say is complementary to what you see in the work programme. And I think it's important that you look through the work programme. It should be your bedtime reading if you're thinking of applying for a proposal. And I'd also encourage you to look at the new series of ERC classes. These are video tutorials available on our YouTube channel, and the links will be shared in the chat of this WebEx meeting, because they give you practical hands-on guidance through the whole process of applying an application. They star our very talented scientific officers who explain how the processes work. Let me just give you some housekeeping rules before we start. We have switched your cameras and your microphones off. That makes things easier for us so that we don't have people inadvertently having their microphone on in the background. We will continue to share links in the chat, so be careful and always check the chat, because you may get some information on the question which you're thinking of asking. But the questions will not be in the chat. The questions will only be in Slido, and we will share again on screen the Slido link for that. So start to prepare your questions. The questions will be opened after the end of the second presentation by my colleague Laura Lobato. I would also say, if you have a really specific question on your specific circumstances, if you're looking at eligibility conditions based in the timing of your PhD or other circumstances that you've had in your life, it's probably best to ask those questions directly to our mailboxes, and we will list in the chat also the functional mailboxes, as we call them, the specific mailboxes for the different types of grants, because then they'll be able to look in your question in more detail and answer it more thoroughly than we would be able to do, giving an on-the-spot answer if it's something which is very specific to your own individual circumstances. Now, I should inform you that this session is being recorded, and the recording of the session and also the presentations that we show today will all be available on our website. And just as if by magic, as we used to say in a UK Kids programme, the functional mailbox addresses that I was just talking about have just appeared in the chat. So as if by magic, they just appeared on screen as I was speaking. So let me now introduce the speakers for today. You see them hopefully all on screen alongside me, depends how your WebEx is configured. So just waving to you there was Laura Lobato Bayon, who is a project advisor in the scientific department. We also have Georgiana Casayadi, who is a financial advisor in the grant management department, and Alejandro Aparezi-Rey, who is a project advisor for ethics, again in the scientific department. And they will give the presentations this afternoon, this afternoon, because you're joining us from this morning in Brussels time, and you will hear from them later. So now you've heard a little bit more about us. We'd like to know a little bit more about you, first of all. So if I could ask my colleagues to share the Slido code on screen. What we would ask you to do is to use this QR code or the Slido code there. Join us on Slido and enter the call that you see. So we have some questions so we can understand who you are. We're over 800 online, and it's good for us to judge to see who our audience is. So hopefully now you've all joined that code. I'll just give you another second or two to join. And I'll let you know whilst you're joining what the first question is. It's very simple. Which country are you joining us from today? So there's the first question. You see the code is still on screen if you haven't had a chance to do it. Let's give a few times, 50, 100 responses, 180 responses. So a lot from Germany, from Italy, from Switzerland, from Greece, from Bosnia, from the UK, from Switzerland, from Poland, even from Japan. Gosh, it'll probably late in the evening for you in Japan. From South Africa, welcome to our colleagues in the Southern Hemisphere. Bulgaria, Israel, Slovenia, Czechia, Cyprus, the Netherlands, Turkey, United Kingdom, Mongolia, gosh, Malaysia. And it's one of the things which I will say in my presentation is one of the nice things about ERC funding is it's open to everybody of any nationality, irrespective of where you are and what type of research that you're doing. So it's great to see so many of you online. I see we're almost at 500 of you answering. We have a good contingent of colleagues from the EU member states, but also from across the world. I see the United Arab Emirates as well that have joined. So thank you very much. We'll move on to our second question, which is equally as simple. And here it's just a poll. What's your current job position? Are you a researcher? Are you a PhD student? Are you non-academic staff? Maybe people helping people writing proposals? Or would you categorize yourself as something different? So I see there's quite a few non-academic staff, but the majority are researchers. Some are PhD students. Some are others, and I guess we'll understand your roles. Maybe you're the national contact points, and we'll talk about the national contact points and who they are and how they help researchers. But I see that we're pretty balanced in terms of almost a quarter for non-academic staff and almost 70% of researchers. This is great. This is really the webinar for you. And so it's great to see so many researchers joining us, but also I'd like to shout out for the non-academic staff who are joining us, because they're your best friends in this application process. They're the ones that will help you locally with the advice and guidance in making your application. And so if you don't know the research support staff in your institution or the institution you're going to be applying with, you should really reach out to them. It'll help you in this application stage. So thank you very much. Then the last question, if we can ask that to go on screen, is just as simple. Which grants are you interested in applying for? Are you more for starting grant, consolidated grant, advanced grant? Now, I know that some of you may be interested in synergy. We didn't put that on the screen because that's something which is not the subject of this specific webinar. We're always happy to do a webinar on synergy if there's demand for that. But I see many of you are probably busily writing then, because the deadline for starting grant is coming up soon. So almost 2/3 of you for starting grant, a third for consolidated grant, and about 10% for advanced grant. So that's great for us to know. We understand the stage that you're coming from. For those of you who are PhD students before, I'd encourage you to look at a portal called ERCEA, because you may be looking for what comes for postdoc positions. And ERCEA has all the job opportunities available in European funding, including those within ERC projects. So if you're looking for a postdoc position within the ERC project, the ERCEA portal is something which will help you. And I'll ask my colleagues to put the link to that in the chat. Okay, so I'll now move on to the program for the day so that you're familiar with what we're doing. So I will give some brief opening remarks, taking you through the very basics of the ERC calls so that you understand some of how these calls work and how they're targeted at you. But my colleagues will then go through the much more detailed presentations. So Laura will talk about the preparation of the project proposal and how to prepare the application, how to choose your panel, how the evaluation process works, and the rules on how you submit proposals and so on. This will be followed by a questions and answers session, and the questions and answers session will open towards the end of Laura's presentation. I see we're on 1,000 online. Great to see so many of you here. Then after that question and answer session, Georgiana will explain the eligible costs and how, particularly how to fill in that budget table, which I know when you're a researcher and it may be the first time you're applying, budget tables look a little bit scary. She'll take you through that and don't worry about that. And Alejandro will provide some guidance on the ethics requirements that you need to think about when you're applying and writing your proposal. This is something which is really of importance, particularly in certain areas of research. It may be less important in others, but Alejandro will guide you through that so that you're clear in terms of how you can submit a complete application, which looks at all of your research from a very responsible and complete way. After the presentations from Georgiana and Alejandro, then there'll be a second question and answer session. So if you have questions on ethics or finance, perhaps leave them for the second and question and answer session. So now I will do the thing which always makes me slightly worried. Let me share my slides. It's always hard to do this when we are working live. So hopefully you will now see my slides. I see Alejandro with his thumbs up, which is great. So just for me to give you an overview of the individual grant calls for this year. And I think the first thing which I'd like to say, and I'm sure you all know, is the European Research Council is part of Horizon Europe, which is the EU Research and Innovation Programme. It's a programme which lasts for 7 years, and the ERC has about 17% of the overall budget, so about 16 billion euros coming from the EU member states. Additional money comes from the countries which are associated to the programme, and I'll explain who they are very shortly. So you see there's a substantial amount of money for you. And the thing which is really important is irrespective of your nationality, irrespective of where you're currently working, and irrespective of the area of your research, there are opportunities for you. So the ERC grants are individual grants, long-term grants, in any field of what we call frontier research. And what we mean by frontier research is your ideas should be pushing back the boundaries of our current knowledge. So we don't refer to basic research or fundamental research or applied research, because sometimes the distinction can be a little bit woolly, a little bit artificial. So we're really looking for research which pushes back the frontiers of current knowledge. So why would you go through all of this process and partake of applying for a grant? I think it's something which offers you a really unique opportunity, because our grants offer you independence. They offer you visibility and recognition because of the prestigious nature of our grants. And you get to work on a research topic of your own choice. The calls are what we call bottom up. This is EU jargon for explaining that it's you that chooses the research topic. So you set out the research question and build your proposal around it. And because of the size of our grants, you can gain financial autonomy for 5 years. For those of you, and many of you online were looking at starting grants, you may not have a permanent position in the university at the moment, but when you're applying with your host institution, you can even claim in your application your salary if you don't have a permanent position at that institution. And that's part of it. You get to negotiate the best conditions of work with a host institution in a member state or an associated country. Because one of the things which I think is really clear and important for you to know is that whilst the grants are open to any nationality of researcher from anywhere in the world, you have to work with a host institution in one of the 27 EU member states or one of the countries which is associated to the pillar of the framework programme where ERC is funded, so pillar 1 of the framework programme. Now, what are these associated countries? These are countries where they've taken a strategic decision and decided and signed an international agreement to align their research with that of the European Union. And so in terms of the countries which are associated to Pillar 1, the ERC of the programme, this is primarily countries in Europe's immediate neighbourhood. So countries in the Western Balkans, Turkey, Israel, the UK, Switzerland, Norway, Iceland. Many of you were joining from these countries we saw from the word cloud earlier. So all of those countries, when they're associated, is considered in an equal basis as if you're in a member state. The other thing which is really important is the size of the grant. So you can attract excellent team members and collaborators from anywhere in the world. And whilst Formally, the grant agreement, and Georgiana will talk about that, is with your host institution. You have the choice if you want to move grant to any place in an EU member state or an associated country, you can do so. It's what we call portability of grants. And so it gives you this true independence. There is also a possibility to win additional funding if to be awarded additional funding if the standard grant amounts don't cover what you need to do for your research. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail, because often that's something which is confusing, and Georgiana will give you full details on that too. So let's look at the grants we're talking about today. So starting grant, consolidated grant, and advanced grant. Starting grant, there are eligibility windows, as you see here, and these are the eligibility windows in 2026. You may be aware that in 27, the Scientific Council of the ERC, who sets our policy, have announced that they will change these eligibility windows slightly, and you'll find more information about that on our website. So starting grants for 2026, 2 to 7 years after the PhD. It's a grant of up to 1.5 million for over 5 years, or up to 5 years. Consolidator 7 to 12 after the PhD, up to 2 million over 5 years. Advanced grant is for any other researcher, or advanced researchers with a track record of significant research achievements, and the other grant is 2.5 million. In each of the grants, you're required to spend 50% at least of your time working in Europe, particularly associated with the host institution that you're submitting your application with. And there are time requirements for how much time you need to spend actually on the grant, which take into account the career stages that you're at. Clearly, advanced grantees will probably have more demands on their time, and so they need to spend less time on their project. Now, if you have really specific questions on how you fit in these eligibility windows, it's best you send those questions to those general email addresses that we shared already in the chat, because really specific questions, it's a bit hard for us to answer during the webinar, but we'd be happy to answer offline. Now, you may have seen from our webinar that we did in July and September, there are some changes to the way in which the proposal is structured for these 2026 calls. I'm just showing it here. Laura will take you this through in much more detail. Something else which is important is this additional funding. Now, when I say additional funding, this is not, this is something which you apply for on an exceptional basis. So if you need additional funding because you have expensive equipment or major experimental costs, or you need to use an international facility, something like that, and you cannot incorporate that, the money for that within the standard grant amounts, you can apply for this additional funding. In addition to that, for researchers moving to one of the member states or associated countries from outside of those countries, you can also apply for up to 2 million for startup costs. And that was increased this year by the Scientific Council. It previously was 1 million. Again, happy to take questions if you have those. Now, we saw from our survey before, many of you are heading towards this submission deadline for starting grant from the 14th of October. Some of you have a little bit more time to plan because you're looking for the Consolidator grant, which will open as of tomorrow. And then there's about 12% of you who are looking to prepare an application for advanced grants, where the call will open next year. Now, I will share on my next slide some links. Don't worry, these will all be shared with you afterwards, but I think it's important that you look at our website for more information. The funding and tenders portal, which is where you access the call for proposals and the application system which you use. I also mentioned the ERC classes, which are these video tutorials which guide you through the whole application process. And then in every EU member state and every associated country, you have who will become your best friend, the national contact points. They are locally appointed experts to guide you through the application process. So they're there to answer questions that you may have on the application process or on how you fill in different parts of the forms. They're your local sources of advice and guidance. And again, you can get their links, the links to them with their contact details from our website and from the funding and tenders portal, but we'll share these links afterwards. And then finally, I'm from the communication department, so I'd encourage you to follow us on social media. You'll get more information on all of our different types of grant schemes, and you see the platforms we're here on. I particularly encourage you to maybe sign up for our WhatsApp channel, because this is somewhere where we really filter the information. So we all have information overload nowadays, but in the WhatsApp channel, you just get information on the call opportunities and the outcomes of calls. So it's very simple and straightforward. And so with that, I will stop my presentation. And now, as I said, the questions and answers will be opened in Slido towards the end of the next presentation. But I'm very happy to give the floor to Laura Lobato, who will take you through the processes for applying grants and how to write a successful grant proposal, which is what you're all here for today. So Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. So I will share my slides. Can you please confirm that you can see them?
Laura, we see them. I don't see them in full screen yet, but I see them. Now I do.
It's coming. Yeah, thank you very much. So again, I'm Laura Lobato Bailón, and I work as scientific advisor in the PE3 panel, which is about condensed matter physics. And when I think about writing a proposal, I think in this image. I'm not writing proposals, scientific proposals, but I like a lot writing. You may have all the background, you may have all the pieces, but still it's very challenging to give a shape to a proposal to any project. So let me start maybe by giving 3 tips regarding the writing of an ERC proposal. And the first one is that this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. Please don't leave the application for the last moment. It will take time. In order to write a proposal, a successful proposal, hopefully, you need to do a proper literature study. You need to know which is the state of the art of the topic. You need to think big, 5 years time. You need to plan ahead. It's not about writing the next paper. It is really about all the research that you want to perform in the next 5 years. You need to establish collaborations in advance. Of course, you will be the lead of your project, but you may need people around you to do or to perform specific activities. Then you will need to write the proposal, and then you will need to check against all the ERC criteria, evaluation criteria. My advice is that you get as much feedback as you can from peers, colleagues, inside your field, outside your field, if you have access also from outstanding scientists, and you need to check before you can finally submit your proposal. So basically, my advice is you need time to do this. You cannot do this in the last month, usually. The second aspect, Martin talked already about this, is that you need to gather a lot of information from all the resources that you may have. Information for applicants, the work program, the ERC website is also very important. Also the national contact points. I know some of them have amazing activities, like for instance, reading days, where you can read proposal from successful grantees in order to have an idea what a successful proposal looks like. And my advice is also that you register early in the Funding Under the Portal, which is the platform through which you will submit your proposal. My advice is again that you can download the templates. These are templates. You are not forced to use them, but my advice is that you download them, you read. There is some information for each of the content that you should write, and it's very, very helpful. I will show later on some screenshots of these templates. And again, Martin said several times again, if you have specific questions, you can always write to these emails, and our colleagues will certainly answer quite quickly. The second tip, get as familiar as you can with the ERC processes, with the evaluation criteria, with the templates, and with the platform. And the third tip is choose wisely your panel. It is important to choose right the panel. We have 3 domains here at the ERC: the life science, physical science and engineering, and social science and humanities. Here you can see all the different panels. And for each of the panels, you can also find some keywords, some descriptors that we call, that may indicate you all the expertise that we have in these panels. The idea is that you can choose a panel that really can cover all the topics of your proposal. For this, if you are a bit lost, you can go to the ERC website, to the dashboard, and you will find you can filter by the panel, and then you can see the project title of the projects that were funded, the abstract, also the PIs, so that you can have an idea actually of the proposals that have been funded in this specific panel. This may guide you. Why it is important to choose properly your panel? Because the proposal will be assigned to the panel of your choice. It's true that sometimes we can have proposal transfer. In two cases, either there is a clear mistake on the part of the applicant, or when we look at the proposal, we realize that in this particular panel, we don't have the expertise to cover all the proposal, and then the panel chairs will need to agree a transfer, and the proposal may eventually go to another panel. The PI will not be informed at this moment. Later on, they will know, but this will be at a later stage. So when talking with potential applicants, I sometimes hear that you need to strategically choose the panel in order to increase the chances of success. So let me tell you that this is a rumor. This is not true. Basically, the budget is allocated based on demands. The panels that got more proposals will have more budget. The success rate is more or less flat for all the panels. So basically, for me, to choose strategically the panel means to choose a panel that can cover the topics of your proposal. You may choose also a secondary panel if you have an interdisciplinary proposal. In those cases, you will need to justify why you choose a secondary panel. And then when we go through the proposal and we are doing the assignment, we may use an expert from another proposal, from this second panel. It is not true either that you need to choose a lot of descriptors from different panels in order to give the idea that your proposal is multidisciplinary. Why? First, because multidisciplinary proposals are not seen better than proposals that are very specific or very niche or focused in a very specific topic. This is not true. And second, because the reviewers will not look at these descriptors in purview one, during the step one. So simply having descriptors without really making a lot of sense for the proposal, the only thing that this makes is that the assignment process is more confusing. So maybe if I recap these three tips, I would say time. Just take the time to write down a good proposal, gather all the information that you can, and choose wisely your panel. These may be the three main ideas that I would like to pass you. So now let's go to the practical level. And this is the form of a proposal. You will have a part A, which is the administrative form, and it will be online. And there are several sections. Information about the proposal and the applicant, information about the house institution, the budget. You will need to complete a table and you will need to write down the things that you are requesting. Then a section about ethics, basically is a table where you need to click to see whether there is any kind of ethics concern for this proposal. My colleague will talk more about ethics. And then you have a section 5 about other questions. Basically, this is statistical information not shared with the panel members. Also, submitted as PDF, you will need to upload the annexes. The statement of support from the host institution, this is mandatory, as well as the copy of the PhD defense. We don't need any kind of reference letters, and if applicable, you will also need to upload some proof, so a certificate of extension of eligibility window for the starting and consolidator, and also information on ethical issues. It could be favorable opinions of ethics committees, regulatory approvals, etc. And then we go to the scientific part. The scientific part is divided in two subparts, part B1 and part B2. Part B1 is about the abstract and cross-panel explanation. Then you have the scientific proposal, which is 5 pages plus references. Please note that the references, and this is very important, do not count against the page limit. So please include the references as for any other kind of academic work. And finally, you have a CV and a track record is a merged document which needs to be up to 4 pages. And then in part 2, you have the full proposal, which is 7 pages plus references. And please note that this is a change for the 2026 call. I will not enter into the details of why this was changed, but of course we could discuss this during the questions and answers. And in this second part, you will not need also to include the funding ID. The funding ID is all the proposals that are ongoing and that may have some overlap at the scientific level with the proposal that you are submitting. The idea is not to assess how many proposals or projects the PI has, but really to understand where the overlap is. So let's go more in detail. Part A, online. I don't want to spend that much time, but basically this is the form what you will find on the screen. This is the first part about the general information. You will need to give the title, to choose a primary panel, secondary panel if applicable, and keywords, free keywords, and also descriptors, and so on for the other sections. This is the form of the table. My colleague will talk much more about the table, but just please note that in this part A, you will also need to explain what you are requesting. So you will put here the numbers, and then you will need to say, I ask for 2 PhD for 3 years each, plus 3 postdocs for 2 years. This is very important. This piece of information will be seen by the panel members. And then we go to the part 1 of the scientific proposal. This is the template, and this is why I was saying that it's important that you download this document. You can see here that you have some details on what you should write. Part 1 should convince the evaluation panel that it presents an original and creative idea addressing an important question, and so on and so on. The idea of this part is that you include the state of the knowledge, the scientific questions, the objectives, and basically an overall approach or strategy. This part 1 will be evaluated by the panel members during the step 1. Panel members will look at this part as generalists, so please make sure that your part 1 is accessible for the whole panel. As I said, references do not count against the page limit, so please include them. And also, please try to keep the format constraints. Do not split the document. Everything needs to be submitted in a single document. Panel members will look at this document and they will try to answer the following question. Is this a great idea that would be worth pursuing? So please keep this question in mind and try to write your part B1 with this idea. In part B1, you have also the CV and the track record. So there are not any more prescriptive principal investigator profiles for a starting consolidator or advanced. Instead, you have 3 sections. First section is about personal details. So basically is the typical curriculum with the positions that you have had and your qualifications. Then you have a second section, which is about the research achievements. Here, you may include up to 10 achievements, with emphasis on more recent achievements. This may be, for instance, papers that you co-authored, but it could be also other kinds of achievements, prizes, fellowships, that you have trained young researchers, all this. This should be a narrative a narrative writing part, actually, short and factual. The idea here, and this is my advice, is that you do not try to conflate your CV. It doesn't make sense, and panel members usually don't like it. And also, my advice here is that whenever you add a paper, please explain the contribution that you had to the paper. And then finally, in the third section about additional information, you should provide the context of your career. If you had any career break, if you have a diverse career path, or any kind of life event that may explain why you have your curriculum. My advice again is that here you use the template. Is clear and very straightforward for panel members who are used to this format. Explain your contribution to the publications, as I said, and describe any other activity that may indicate your scientific maturity. This is especially very important for starting applicants. They need to prove that they are independent at the scientific level. And if you have gaps or any other issues, of course, explain. Also, when going to conferences or when talking to applicants, I hear some concerns about the need to have a high H index, about the need to publish in high impact journal factors like Nature, Science, and so on. I can't really tell you, this is a rumor. First of all, panel members do not talk about high impact factors. We don't even mention this during the panel meetings, I can reassure you. And I show here small graph of the H index distribution of the grantees, so people that were funded for the starting 24 P3 call. And you can see actually that the H index goes from 7 to 19. So basically, panel members will look at the proposal first, and then they will evaluate your CV, looking at whether this particular person can lead the project. They will evaluate your creativity, your independence, your capacity to lead the project. As I said, for starting, what is important is maybe to prove your independence. So it is good to have some papers without the PhD supervisor, basically. But again, this will depend on the specific cases. I don't want to give here a rule, let's say. There are no rules. And then we go to the part 2 of the scientific proposal, which is basically your full proposal of 7 pages now. Before, it used to be 14. Now it has been reduced to 7. Here, you need to talk about the implementation, the methodology, how you are going to do it, the work plan, very detailed, what you plan to do every year of your project, a risk assessment, and of course, the mitigation measures. And you may also have the budget justification. In part A, I showed the table. You need to introduce the numbers, but then in the proposal, you need to explain why you are asking for 2 PhD students, why you are asking for visits of professors from other universities, why you are collaborating with this particular person, and which activities this particular person will do. This part will be evaluated in step 2 only by the panel members and also by experts. These are the remote referees, and these are worldwide experts that will evaluate your proposal remotely. In step 2, they will have access to part 1 and part 2. And with this, they should have the whole picture of the proposal. Here, the panel and the referees will basically try to answer the following question. Can this idea be pursued realistically? And if so, in the manner and with the approach that the applicant proposes? So basically, they will be looking at the implementation and at the feasibility of the proposal. As I said, it is important to justify the budget. Why? Because the budget analysis is done at the step 2 of the evaluation. Panels have the responsibility to ensure that what you have asked is justified. They can cut some issues, but they will never negotiate half of the price. They will, if they cut something, they will cut something that they see it is not justified, and it will be the whole set. If you ask for an equipment and they think that it's not justified that you ask for this equipment will be cut. I have to say also, in my experience, that cuts are weird, and that in the interview, because in the step 2, there is the interview of the applicant, if they have any concern about the budget, they will most probably ask. They want to know why you ask for it. They don't have any reason to, in principle, cut. In Horizon Europe, as you may know, open access is mandatory, so you may ask also for open access fees. They are eligible. And you can also, this is a very typical question, you can ask money for collaborators. They may be placed in your host institution, in another host institution, or even in another country. If they are developing an activity that is related directly to your project, they are eligible to be paid. There are a lot of rumors about budgets. I don't want to go too much into detail because my colleague will talk later. But basically, I don't think that the best strategy is to conflate the budget. You need to justify properly what you are asking, knowing that different topics will have different needs, right? It is not the same a project that is theoretical than a project that is highly experimental. It is not the same a project in mathematics that in life sciences. So you need to look at your needs, basically, and be very honest about what you are asking. The idea is that you can develop easily your project, that you have all the equipment needed if needed. So I would like to conclude this second section of the presentation, but what I consider maybe 3 questions that you should answer in your proposal. The first question is what and how. What do I want to do? Is it ambitious? Is it novel and groundbreaking? In part B2, is it feasible? Can I do this? Which methodology am I using? Which are the main risks of my proposal and how can I mitigate them? What has been already done about this? The second question is why? Why is it important? Why is important what I'm doing? Why this is a good moment to do this? Who has been working on similar topics and to which point? And the third question is why me? Have I proved my creativity, my independence, my scientific independence? Why shall I be leading this project? And I think that these 3 questions should be clearly answered within part 1 and part 2 of the scientific proposal. Now, you can see it's not an easy exercise to write down a proposal. It takes a lot of time and effort. And many times applicants just wonder, shall I apply now? Shall I maybe wait to be a bit more senior, to be at the end of the eligibility window? May I have more chances then because I will have a build-up CV? And the question, if you look at the graph, it is clearly no. There is not a clear answer. It will depend on how mature your project is. But you can basically see here in green the starting eligibility window, in orange the consolidator, and in blue the advanced. And you can see in violet the success rate, and you can see that it's virtually flat for all the eligibility window. So the answer is try to see whether your project is mature, whether you have an idea that is groundbreaking and innovative, whether you are prepared as an investigator to lead this project. And if so, my advice would be that you apply. I will not spend time on this. Now you may know actually that the starting is from 2 to 7 years after the PhD, and Consolidator is actually from 7 to 12. But some changes may come in the 2027 call, so just stay tuned. And this brings me to the eligibility extensions. You can extend the eligibility window, and you have here all the typical cases: maternity, paternity, long-term illness, military service, clinical training, natural disaster, seeking asylum, and victims of gender-based violence. This last one, has been added in this program. So this is new for 2026 call. I will not go into detail of this, but of course, I invite you to write down any question that you may have related to the eligibility extension. Also to mention that there is no limit of the total of years that you can ask. You can just add up one extension after the other if properly justified. And this is also something that I may say. Maternity, you are directly granted 18 months per child. For the rest of the cases, you need to actually send a proof from the host institution or from your employer of the time that you could not work because of any of these reasons. So this needs to be documented. And I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I didn't talk about the evaluation process. We talked basically about the application. But let me give, like in few words, an idea of how we evaluate the proposals. So you have a two-step submission, part 1 and part 2, which means that we have a two-step evaluation process. At step 1, we have a remote assessment. So basically, we receive all the proposals at the ERC. These proposals are assigned to the panels that are closer in expertise to your proposal, and then they do the remote assessment. So each one of the panel members will look individually to the proposal, part 1, and CV and track record. This is the only document they will have access to. Then we gather in Brussels for the step 1 panel meeting, and we decide the proposal that will pass to step 2. In this step 1, we will have proposals with an A non-invited. These are proposals, high quality proposals, rated A, but they are not able to pass to step 2. And then we will have proposals with a B or a C score. And this will have also an impact on the resubmission restrictions. I will talk a bit later. And then we have all the proposals that will be retained to step 2, and they will be scored with an A invited. Also new from last year, we can only pass 44 proposals from step 1 to step 2. And then it comes step 2. In step 2, we have again a remote assessment. By who? By the panel members, and also by these worldwide experts that we call remote reviewers. They will look at the full proposal, meaning part 1, CV and track record, part 2, and also the budget. With all this information, they will individually send their assessment, and then the panel members only will meet again in Brussels for the step 2 panel meeting. In this second panel meeting, we will have interviews for all the calls, starting Consolidator and Advanced. And here we may have two different kinds of proposals. Proposals scored with B, these are rejected, and proposals scored with A, and they will be funded within the available budget. Just to finalize saying that you will all get feedback, all. If you are rejected in step 1, you will receive feedback at this moment, at the moment of the rejection. If you pass to step 2, you will not have feedback at this moment, but then at the end of the evaluation, in step 2, you will have also feedback. The feedback is composed of a panel comment and all the individual reviews from the panel members and the remote reviewers, if applicable. And this feedback is an important piece of information for you. what happens if I don't get the grant? Can I apply next year? So as I said, the score that you get will have a direct impact on the reapplication. If you pass to step 2, you will be able to reapply next year, independently of whether you got an A unfunded or a B. Now, if you are rejected at step 1, it will depend. If you get an A uninvited, this means that your proposal is of high quality. It could have passed to step 2, but because of this cap of 44 proposals, it didn't pass. So you will be able to reapply next year. This is a very good proposal. If you have a B proposal, we consider that some elements could be improved, and then you will need to wait for 1 year. This means if you apply to the 2025 call, for instance, and you get a B in the step 1, you will not be able to apply in the 2026 call, and you will need to wait until the 2027 call. Similarly, if you had a C, this means that your project probably needs major modifications, and then you need to wait for 2 years before you are able to reapply. This means if you apply for the 2025 call, you will need to wait for the 2026, 2027, and then you will be able to reapply on the 2028 call. I don't like to finish on a negative note, but I would like just to give few words on the typical reasons for rejection. These are the scope, the project is too narrow. Sometimes it could be also too ambitious. Even if we look for ambitious proposals, we need to see that it is feasible, that it is focused, that there is really an approach that makes sense. Because it could not be groundbreaking enough, or the panel considers that there is only an incremental improvement. The work plan is not detailed, or there is insufficient risk management, or many times it's also about the feasibility. It is a very nice idea, but we don't see how this could be performed. It could be also about the principal investigator, whether they have insufficient track record, or whether it is not clear that this person can carry out the project. For instance, the person didn't prove their capability for creativity, for working on very impactful work, for leading the project. They have lack of relevant expertise. All these you will get in the feedback. So now let me finish with a positive note. If you are rejected, just keep trying. Reapplicants have a higher success rate, and please use the feedback from the evaluation reports. It is very, very useful, and panel members take a lot of time to write down your feedback. Thank you very much. I may stop sharing probably.
Yes, please go ahead and stop sharing, Laura. So thank you very much for your presentation. We've opened the questions and answer session, which you may have seen in the chat. So we're already on 34 questions. We will answer as many of these questions as we can, and we'll answer them in the order in which they have been given the vote. So the most popular questions we will answer first. If some of the questions relate to later presentations, we'll perhaps leave them for later or give more details later. And don't worry, if we don't get a chance to go through all of the questions, we will answer them after the webinar and post them in written answers on the website for this webinar. So maybe, Laura, if you can start going through the questions, feel free to refer them to me or to other speakers if there are things which you don't relate to your presentation.
Yeah. So the first one with 33 likes is, please could you explain what you are expecting to find in part 1 about overall strategy? So this is just to mention, it is not a methodology. You don't really need to go into the details of how you will implement the proposal, but you need to give an idea of which is your strategy, which are the objectives. I would say that the objectives are somehow related to the strategy. How are you thinking that you will carry out this research? You need to talk about state of the art, about the competitors in the field, And you need to also see which is your strategy to differentiate from these competitors working on similar topics. It is really your scientific strategy, what you want to do and how you are planning to do it. You don't need to talk about feasibility at this level. And this is a change also for this call. Feasibility will be included in part B2, together with the methodology and the implementation. In the previous format, redundancy was common. In the new one, how much repetition in B1 and B2 is fine? It is unavoidable. This is a very good question. You need the parts 1 and 2 need now to be complementary. In step 2, panel members have access to both part 1 and part 2, and these two parts combined should give the whole picture of the proposal. The second part, again, needs to focus on the implementation and feasibility, and the first part needs just to give the general idea. My advice is that you don't repeat. It has been, the second part has been decreased from 14 to 7 pages, precisely to avoid repetition, so that panel members don't have to spend too much time reading again what was put in part 1. How much detail should be the budget description in part B2? Yeah, this is also a very common question. In part A, which is the administrative form, you will need to complete the table, and you will also need to say what you are requesting. So I am requesting a cryostat because I need to do this experiment. I'm requesting at the personal cost level, I'm requesting 2 PhD students plus 3 postdocs for 2 years each. This is part A. Now, in part B2, you need to justify why you want this. This is, for instance, one thing of doing this is while you are talking about the work plan, what you want to do. It is very easy to say, during the first year, the first PhD will work on this topic, on this topic. In second year, the PhD will work on this topic, and this topic. You need to justify why you need these resources. It is not that you need to write down specific part about budget justification, but the panel members will appreciate very much if these resources are justified. With only 7 pages, this excludes the inclusion of figure, doesn't it? No, of course, you can include figures. It is really up to you to see how you write down your proposal, but you should include figures if they are important. Yeah, of course. Based on the changes of part 2, does this mean that part 1 should only report the novelty and part 2 only implementation details? May we consider a clear separation of concerns? So avoid redundancies between the parts. I think I answered already about this. In part 1, basically, the panel members will look at whether this is a good idea. In part 2, they will see whether this idea makes sense, whether this can be implemented, whether it is feasible, whether you include a risk assessment and also mitigation measures. You need to avoid redundancies. This is the idea. Why me? Should it be self-explanatory by CV, or should I write about it in 5 pages, part B1? No. Part 1 of the scientific proposal, it is about the scientific proposal. It is the scientific content. Now, in part B1, it is composed of the part 1 scientific proposal plus the CV and track record. The CV and track record is up to 4 pages. And this CV and track record, it is a document divided in 3 sections. The first one is the typical CV, and then the track record. It is a narrative CV where you can explain which have been your main achievements, and also any kind of situation that you had that may explain why your CV it is like it is. It has this form. So I would recommend not to include any of these in part 1 of the scientific proposal. For part B1, it is advised to mention potential collaborations either with host institute or outside institute universities, or should it focus more on the individual scientific independence and keep collaborations for part B2? I don't think there is a way to do this. It will depend, of course, on your project, on whether it is very focused on a single topic and you are really the expert of this topic, or on the contrary, it is a bit more multidisciplinary and then you need to really make use of other experts. If you need to make use of other experts, of collaborators, it is good that you mention already in part B1. Why should you keep this for part B2? It is then in your CV and track record that you should make sure that you live very clearly, that you show very clearly why, even if you are not a perfect expert of all the topics of your project, you should still lead the project. But my advice is that if you are using collaborators, which is like very, very typical, I would say in almost all the proposals, you mention this. Of course, you should be clear about this. Does we do not need a state-of-the-art objective theory pilot results section anymore? Indeed. Well, indeed, kind of. State-of-the-art will be in part B1. The objectives will be in part B1. The theory, I guess you mean literature. It is mainly in part B1. And pilot results, I guess that you mean preliminary results. They can be also in part B2. It really depends. It is good to put some preliminary results because it really helps with feasibility. Again, the challenge is to which point you include these preliminary results, but this is another question. Another question, if only 44 proposals pass to step 2, how many will receive funding at the end? Okay, we had to, so the Scientific Council decided to put these 44 proposals as a cap, mainly because of logistic restrictions. We have increasingly calls with more and more submissions. We have for 1 week the panel members here in Brussels, and we have also a limit on the capacity of proposals that we can pass to step 2 and on people that we can interview. Now, the success rate at the end of the day remains the same. It will be the same for all the panels for this call. It is usually about 14-13% for starting, for instance, and this will be still the success rate at the end of the call. It doesn't change the success rate. It only changes the intermediate success rate for proposals passing from step 1 to step 2. I hope this is clear. If not, please let me know. I can come back to this. I wonder about the use of visual versus text. What is the recommendation? I wouldn't say there is any kind of recommendation here. It would really depend on your proposal, whether you really need to provide a lot of graphs or whether you want to explain with text. It's really up to you. And here, I don't want to say anything. You are the experts and you know your topic and you know what you want to explain. How is the use of LLM rated within the panel? What does it mean, LLM?
Laura, this is about the use of artificial intelligence with large language models. And there you'll see on our website that the Scientific Council has given a statement on the use of LLMs. I mean, there is no need to formally declare it in the proposal. That's something which the Scientific Council is looking at. But I think we all use this. We all use this to help us write, to help us check our proposals, maybe used in some other ways. And so I think the Scientific Council expects that these probably be used more increasingly, but there's no formal rules. They're not viewed positively or negatively in that respect. We assume that when you're writing a proposal, you'll use all the tools which will help you write a good proposal. And I think this is increasingly becoming the case. So Laura, I don't know if you have anything else to add from your perspective.
No, thank you very much. I think that was very helpful. Thank you. So the next one, could you clarify if there is a difference in the content of the budget justification in Part A, Section C, and in Part B2? Is it mandatory in Part B2? And does it apply to the 7 pages limits? Again, in Part B2, it is not that you have a specific section for this. You can include this within the text of your proposal. It is different. I talk largely about this, but basically in Section C, in Part A, it is about what you want to ask for. And in Part B2, why are you asking for these specific resources? How should collaborations be presented? And it is possible to request extra funds for subcontracting. Should these partners be mentioned explicitly in Part B2? About all the details, my colleague, how this goes at the budget level, my colleague will probably talk. Yes, you can ask for extra funds for subcontracting if necessary. How you should present your collaborations, simply saying that this specific collaborator will do this specific aspect of the proposal. When I talk about collaborations, I always say that it is normal to have collaborators, but still you should prove that you can lead the project. You may not be expert on all the subtopics of your proposal. It is fine, but still you should be able to lead the proposal, to lead these collaborators to the objectives that you have settled in your proposal. You should explicitly, and this is an obligation, you should explicitly have the consent of these collaborators. You need a written proof. You don't need to submit it, but you need to have by the time that you submit your proposal. And of course, I really advise you to be open about the collaborators that you will be having. How exactly the score of the PI is used in the evaluation of the application? The scores, you mean the scores that panel members and remote reviewers, well, I don't know, I guess that this refers to the internal scores that they give during the remote assessment. Basically, the scores so far, and in my experience, they don't have that much weight, in the sense that it is true that they are supposed to give a score, but then when we meet in Brussels, basically we discuss the proposals and we go through all of them, and basically we don't work on score basis. This is my experience in panel P3. Now, it could be slightly different in other panels. I cannot talk for the other panels, but it is really an internal guidance for the panel. And the most important, actually, and this is why we meet on site here in Brussels, is that we discuss the proposals. We really go through a discussion. It is not only about the individual reviews that these panel members or remote referees gave.
Laura, could I just add one thing? I think also perhaps what the question is coming at is the relative weight. And of course, the weight is given, the evaluation is given to the idea first.
Yes.
So having a great idea is much more important.
Yes.
So the weight of the idea in terms of the proposal is the weight in the evaluation, the weight is given to the quality of the idea rather than the CV of the PI.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. Can we mention unpublished results in part B1 and or B2? Yes. Of course, when it is published already, it has more credibility in the sense that there is a peer review. If it's unpublished results, and it could be maybe considered as preliminary result, it is important if it's something that can show feasibility, that can prove feasibility. Now, again, to the level that you want to add these unpublished results, I would leave it to you, of course. You should be able to know better whether this is a good thing or not, but you can mention unpublished results. This is something that we often see.
Laura, just in the interest of time, maybe we take one more question.
Okay.
And then if there's time at the end, we can come back to these questions. If not, we'll answer them in writing. Okay,
so the last one, are the expert reviewers required to read first the B1 part and then the B2, or the B2 part should have a context to facilitate the interpretation? Maybe I was not very clear during my presentation, but this is a two-step evaluation. In step 1, panel members will only look at part B1. And then in part B2, if the proposal passes to step 2, all the panel members and the remote referees will have access to the both parts of the scientific proposal. So basically, you should not repeat in part B2 what you said already in part B1. This is the main idea. And this kind of comes back to the idea that part B2 has been decreasing in the number of pages from 14 to 7. Now.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. If I can ask our colleagues to stop sharing the Slido screen. Don't worry, we will park those questions for now so that the next question and answer session focus on the next set of presentations. But if there's time at the end of the webinar, we'll come and answer some of these questions which have remained unanswered, or we will answer them in writing subsequently. So Laura, thank you very much for an excellent overview of the evaluation and submission processes. Now I'd like to talk to we'd like to turn to another talk on another very important part of writing your proposal, which is looking at how you put in place your budget. And so Georgiana, the floor is yours if you'd like to take us through your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning on my side as well. Let me see if I managed to share the screen correctly. Do you see it?
We see
my
it
presentation,
perfectly.
can you confirm? Yes,
you
hear me well as well?
Indeed.
Great. During my short presentation and intervention, I will just complement the information already presented with some more, but this time focusing on the financial side, on how to prepare the budget of your proposal. So you wrote your proposal and you start planning your resources. Laura emphasized the need to prepare and to justify the resources so that the whole information at the end, which is presented to the panel, is a harmonized one, which makes sense as a whole. So you ask yourself, when it comes to the resources, what do I need to implement the project? I will need a team, of course, some equipment. I know that I need to perhaps show my project results in specialized conferences, or I need to collaborate with certain entities. I need to travel to libraries or to do my field work, whatever fits to your project. You know it best. So once you know your resources need, with the help of the host institution, and I'm stressing that is very important to rely and to work hand in hand with your host institution, you will start estimating and putting on paper the costs associated with these resources. So this is how the budget looks like when you fill in your application. It is online, and you will start writing the figures directly into the system. When you do this, when you start writing these figures under each of the columns, the system will calculate some elements automatically. And those columns are the ones marked in green on my on the screen. One of them is the indirect costs. So this is automatically calculated by the system and represents a flat rate of 25%, calculated from the direct costs you encode. Okay, so also another column, another item which is calculated automatically by the portal, by the system, is the total figures that you wrote plus the overheads. This is what we call total eligible cost of your project. What the system does not do is to calculate the last column, the one marked in red, the amount that you request from the EU to implement the project. So this is something that you have to write and to put the figures under the requested EU contribution. Please keep in mind, I mean, it may sound obvious, but we saw issues and errors. Pay attention to express the figures correctly. That is in full amounts with zeros, not with Ks or with percentages, because the system will not be able to recognize them. So when you request this EU contribution, this will be the amount which will be referenced by the panel, and it will matter in the final amount which will be awarded to you. Keep in mind that for each form of grant, there is a ceiling. For instance, for a Consolidator grant, keep in mind that you cannot request more than 2 million plus any eventual additional funding. Okay. When it comes to something that Laura mentioned earlier, there is a resources text box below the budget table where you should provide a clear description and justification of why certain resources are needed. Laura already mentioned and stressed it. The panel would like to understand and assess what resources and costs will be financed. It should not be very long, so length is just 8,000 characters, but it should be really relevant, meaningful, and precise. So please describe all the cost categories in a structured manner, keeping in mind that they will be the window by which the panel will understand how will you implement the project from the resources point of view. Laura already mentioned any unjustified budget might be a reason for a cut of the total amount awarded. This table and this resources box is valid for starting grant and consolidator, so for the actual cost type of grants, whereas for the advanced grant, which is now as a lump sum, we have separate boxes for each cost category. So you'll have to explain in one little box the personnel, another one for additional funding, one for equipment. So the information, the final information will be slightly more structured. This slide summarizes what I mentioned earlier. What is important, and I would like to stress, is that when you discuss with the host institution about the estimated cost for the project, only the eligible cost must be claimed. Okay, so you may have higher costs, but keep in mind that there are certain eligibility criteria. And this is why it is very important to talk to the host institution, because they can guide you to define what is eligible from the perspective of the host institution rules and from the perspective of the Horizon Europe rules. So this is the best advice that that I can give you, and to pass the message is to rely on the host institution and work hand in hand to guide you when you create the resources and the budget and you transform them into figures. At proposal stage, the way you build up your budget is valid for any type of grants, that is both for actual cost type of grants, that is starting, consolidator, and synergy, and for the lump sum type of grants, that is advanced grants and proof of concept. That is the best way, the way to build up your budget is based on the best estimation of actual cost, minding the eligibility conditions set out in the model grant agreement and the host institution rules. Okay, perhaps one word on collaborations, because there was a question a bit earlier. So collaborations are possible indeed. There are different ways to appoint them into the project, but it depends very much on their implication into the project. So how much of the research they will perform. Will they claim any cost to the project? So there are different questions to answer, and this will lead to different paths. So it can be even additional beneficiaries, or subcontracting is one of the forms. So yes, subcontracting is an eligible cost that you can claim in an ERC project. Let's start with each cost category to see some details. The first one is the personnel cost. The personnel costs are subdivided into subcategories: principal investigators, senior staff, postdocs, students, and other personnel. If all the previous categories are self-explanatory, perhaps one word on what and who should be included under personnel cost, other personnel cost. That is the team members who don't belong in any of the other categories, perhaps lab technicians or research assistant or administrative personnel, keeping in mind that for the personnel, for administrative personnel, you have to check with the host institution, as usually such costs are not eligible as a direct cost unless they are performing support tasks which are necessary for the implementation of the project. And this is a rule in the host institution to consider such cost as direct cost. You have to describe them, of course, in the resources, and from the cost point of view, the beneficiary, the host institution, must be able to demonstrate and document that this, the actual cost of this administrative staff and the time dedicated to the project is based on actual participation and not just a percentage or a flat rate. Again, under the resources, describe the size and the nature of the team, pointing out what is each of them doing, structure the information, and keep it short and clear. As mentioned before, the guidance of the host institution is essential also for the personnel, because the salaries of the researchers should be paid in accordance with the host institution rules and remuneration policy, keeping in mind the normal pay scales, which in each host institution might be different and have, and of course they are based on clear characteristics of age, experience. There are certain type of components which are charged. So again, the host institution may help you with that, because personal costs are limited to salary, to social security contribution, to taxes, and other costs which are linked to the remuneration, if of course they arise from the national law and from the employment contract or the equivalent appointing out act. They have of course to be calculated basis on the actually cost incurred. And of course, it is reasonable when you're planning your budget now for a project of 5 years to think of a salary increase over the project duration. Like this, you will have a reasonable estimated personnel cost based on the host institution reality. That budget table, I mean, the personnel cost, that was valid for the Consolidator and starting grants, that is for actual cost type of grants. For the lump sum type of grant, that is the advanced grants, the table on personnel cost will be slightly different that you need to fill in. The end result is the same, but the way you encode and you write the data is different. So you write the person month and the costs for the respective person months, and the system will automatically calculate the average monthly cost. For example, if the PI wishes to spend 50% of his or her total working time on the grant, you will write in a 5 years project, you will write 30 person months and the cost for these 30 person month, and the system will calculate the monthly average. Why is this different for advanced grant lump sum? Because first of all, the lump sum projects are based on a different model of grant, and the panel, when doing their evaluation on the reasonability of the costs, might reference a tool which is based on historical data on average personnel cost on ERC project. This tool is called Personnel Dashboard, which is available also for you for consultation. Of course, you're not obliged to write the same amounts like you find there for each of the subcategories of personnel, but you of course have to follow the rules applicable in the host institution. Another category of direct costs are those grouped under purchase costs, be them travel, both for your team members and for the invited guest researchers to participate in activities which are linked to the project. So this, I stress this, that the part of the eligibility condition is so the project, the cost to be linked to the project and relevant to the project, such as field work, conferences, workshops. Keep in mind that team building activities for entertainment and hospitality purposes will generally be considered not eligible. Another subcategory under purchase cost are equipment needed for the project, consumable, publication, and other auxiliary activities which are externalized to support the research. For instance, a catering to a conference, the audit certificate that you need to have at the end of the grant, translation cost, or fees paid for patients participating in a medical trial. So example may continue in this direction. Similar to the other cost categories, you will estimate the resources needed, and the host institution will guide you in which categories to qualify them and what kind of cost to be claimed based on the host institution usual rules and on the Horizon Europe margins. Perhaps one word on equipment cost, because this sometimes raises confusion. We don't reimburse the purchase cost, but only the depreciation over the duration of the project based on the host institution policy of depreciation. It is especially important for advanced grant lump sum because for these kind of grants, you are requested to upload a mandatory document annex, which is called the equipment depreciation table, where you will have to list all the equipment, the depreciation policy, and the amount to be encoded in the budget. So I just mentioned that we always reimburse the depreciation cost. Still, there is an exception to this general rule. In some very exceptional cases, you could reimburse the purchase cost, that is the total cost. But for this, you need to explain it in the resources section why you need the full reimbursement. And I'm referring here to this is what we call full capitalized costs. What we had in mind with the specific provisions are exactly those cases which are exceptional, where one of the action tasks or one of the main tasks of the project is to build a huge machine or a prototype. And in general, the host institution accounting rules foresee that the cost for the prototype cannot be claimed until it is fully built and installed. So that would mean, in practice, let's assume that it will be fully built and installed in the last months of the project. So that would mean that practically none of those costs could be eligible. So this is why we had this in mind, this exception. This is a kind of cost which might be accepted, of course, upon evaluation. You have to mention it in your proposal. But keep in mind that there are very specific accounting rules as well, not only that it's a prototype or it's there are also some conditions which are related to the accountancy of the host institution to be minded as well. So I will not detail them now, but if you have such a case in your project, check with your host institution on how this equipment is registered in the accountancy, and check together the provisions for the full capitalized costs which appear in the work program 2026 there. Okay. So this was with the purchase costs. Just few words on the internally invoiced goods and services. I will not get into many details, but I just want to point out that sometimes there is a misunderstanding on what costs represent in the context of the grant agreement under this category, because there is a very specific definition which sometimes creates confusion. So internally invoiced goods and services are for us those invoices between the department and units of the same legal entity, so of the host institution, and these costs are unit costs. So these are the two key elements which qualify a cost as an internally invoiced goods and services. The fact that the costs are within, the invoices are within the same legal entity, but in between departments. And the fact that there are unit costs, which is a fixed price calculated by the host institution and which does not vary. So an example, there are several examples here on the screen. You need to use the laboratory which belongs to another department, and that department invoices your team and the project for the use of that facility. And it's a fixed price, a unit cost, this is the rule in the host institution to calculate this access as a unit cost. And in that case, you have to declare them under internally invoiced goods and services. And this is very important to make this distinction compared to the other direct costs, because it's not just for the sake of putting it in another cost category, but this matters because they do not enter into the calculation of the indirect cost of those 25% that I mentioned earlier. So the examples that you see on the screen and the conditions, the specific conditions, are very well described in a document that we use a lot during granting and the project implementation, but which can be very useful for you as well at this stage when you're preparing the proposal. Normally the host institution financial department know it very well. It's called annotated grant agreement. It's useful because it's basically the grant agreement explained article by article. And when it comes to cost and the cost categories of this budget, they are detailed with the examples. So it might be useful even at this stage for you to check. Then I would like to finish with what we call additional funding. Already Martin gave you an introduction on this type of costs. I summarized on the screen the type of grants and the standard amount. This is the maximum. In the first column, you see the maximum standard amount which can be awarded to your project. Of course, it is a maximum. You can claim up to the needs of your project. To this standard amount, you might apply for additional money. That is the second column. On the top of the standard ceilings, if needed for the project, and I stress this, if your project needs, as Martin was saying, for certain costs, you may claim this amount at proposal as additional money. it is not given by default. It is you who needs to apply for this extra funding at the time of the proposal. And this is very important because later on, once the proposal is evaluated and awarded, no other extra funding can be requested or awarded. What is the additional funding meant for? It's meant to cover relatively large costs that would exceed the normal grant maximum when these are necessary to carry out the project and the proposed work. What kind of costs? For instance, to finance major field work, which is very costly, or experimental work, or buying a very costly equipment. But they are not limited to this example, of course. And this is a novelty for 2026 calls, because before we used to have 4 strict purposes. And now, as of 2026, these 4 categories and purposes or objectives are no longer present. It is more flexible, and even personnel costs can be included as well. For instance, you absolutely need to bring one specialized researcher from the US to be part of your team member, and then you may claim it as additional funding. Of course, keep in mind that this is requested by you at the proposal, and this is assessed by the panel. For this, there is a maximum of 1 million available for these purposes. And since Advanced Grant 2025, and this remains applicable for 2026 calls as well, an extra million specifically targeted for researchers moving to EU or associated country, to take out the project and to carry out the ERC project has been added. Okay, so for Advanced Grant, Consolidator, and Starting, there is an extra million compared to to what it used to be before, the maximum 1 million for additional funding, specifically targeted for startup costs to come to Europe or associated country, especially for the ERC project. Again, you have to explain in the proposal why this extra money is needed and why the respective costs do not go under the standard funding, and this will be evaluated by the panel. I reiterate the key elements only if needed for the project and requested in the proposal, not later, because then it would be too late. This is the end of my presentation. I invite you to consult the information for applicants when you're preparing the budget, because there is each cost category and the budget and the resources requirements are explained. If you want to complement that information, although I advise you to check this additional document, which is the annotated grant agreement I mentioned you earlier, just for you to have additional details on each cost categories and eligibility conditions and what are the Horizon Europe margins. I will stop sharing now so that.
Thank you very much, Georgiana, and thanks for that presentation. I hope that's clarified a lot of the questions which I know many researchers have on how you complete the budget.
If not, I'm here for questions.
And we will open the questions and answers session again in Slido. There have already been some questions submitted in the first section on budget and ethics. You can see we will open it to new questions very shortly as well. So now our last presenter is Alejandro Aparecere, and Alejandro will take you through how to write and how to deal with the ethics requirements in your application. Alejandro, the floor is yours. We see your slides, Alejandro. We don't hear you yet, but we don't hear you, I'm afraid. We did see your slide.
Sorry for that. Now you should hear me, and in a minute you should see my slides.
We do. We're seeing you putting them on full screen. Now everything looks good.
Okay, thanks. Perfect. Great. So thank you very much for staying with us today. We see a lot of attendees, and that's really great news. Let me start by saying how important these events are for us. As you know, they are organized to introduce you the changes that we implement regularly, but also to promote participation in our program, because we firmly believe that the Horizon Europe program helps Europe to be stronger, more resilient, and more competitive. But for the program to be strong and representative, we really need to have as many scientists from as many member states as possible. So that is one key objective of this presentation. Now, moving on to the last presentation of the morning, we are going to be talking about ethics for about 10 minutes. My name is Alejandro, and I'm an ethics officer working at ERCEA since 2022. And I would like to dedicate some time to explain why do we care about ethics, and to provide you with some basic information on how to approach the application from an ethical point of view. Now, this presentation is designed to be more like a tips and tricks on how to prepare your application and to give you some practical information, but I would like to start by reflecting a bit on the question of why do we care about ethics. Now, this may be a pretty obvious question to many of you, but I think it's still important to reflect a little together on responsible research. And let me start by saying that worrying about ethics is respecting essential principles of our society. Principles such as beneficence, justice, or respecting the autonomy of citizens, and in our case, perhaps potential participants in your experiments. Now, considering these principles right from the beginning, it's what we call ethics by design, and it will result in a stronger, more respectful, and fairer research. Why is it important, particularly for ERC grants? Well, if you are here, it's because you are in the business of groundbreaking research, and you are about to design the most wonderful and innovative experiments. And these, by definition, tend to happen at the edge of ethical boundaries. And so it's important to have ethically sound research because it increases society's trust in science. And that is also why we have in the executive agency of the European Research Council a unit of ethics officers entirely dedicated to help you in dealing with the ethics challenges of your research. Now, as I mentioned, this innovative research tends to happen in a gray space where nobody has done certain things. And sometimes you will face new ethical dilemmas without reference framework. And that is why we are here to help you. One word on transparency and accountability, and this is another reason why you need to care about ethics in your research. And it is because the transparency and accountability lies on you, the principal investigators and host institutions. So if only to protect you from a legal perspective, you really need to think about all the ethical issues of your research right from the beginning. Right, so let's have a look on the different steps that you can follow to prepare an ethically sound application. First of all, you need to identify the ethical challenges. Your research may require the collection of sensitive personal data, perhaps fieldwork in conflict areas, or animal testing. These are just some examples. I don't want you to take this as the only ethics issues that are considered serious and complex, but they help me to illustrate when your research may be actually needing an extra pair of eyes on the ethical dimension. Of course, not all research in all disciplines is going to entail ethical issues, and it is also important to understand that if you do research on mathematics or theoretical physics, you may have only a few issues to address. But it is important that you identify them right from the outset, and you need to detail ethical considerations and protocols clearly in your proposal. I will come to the practical aspects in a minute. So in general, this is what we call ethics by design. Integrate ethics right from the start of your reflection period and the writing of your proposal. Once that you have identified the ethical challenges, you need to justify the need for your experiments. Reflect on that need in light of the ethical challenges and the benefits for society. Explain why they are essential. It is important because a well-argued justification demonstrates commitment and responsibility. We know that you are committed. We know that you are completely engaged and you are going to perform responsible research, but you need to show us to some extent, especially when the ethical issues of your research are considered serious and complex. So in other words, just make a risk-benefit analysis. And you need to also familiarize with ethical and legal frameworks. For most research practices, there exist ethical codes and laws applicable to your research, which provide a safe space for your project. you need to indicate them. We know that you know them, but you need to indicate them in the application to demonstrate ethical awareness and legal compliance. Great. So once you have identified the risk and you know which laws and frameworks can or actually regulate the particular research practice, you may actually find risk mitigation measures on those texts. So just try to identify which ones can be useful for you to mitigate the risk and include them in your ethics assessment. This is important because an ethics issue that is considered at first very serious and complex, can be actually perceived as a not so significant, not so sensible, if the risk mitigation strategies are already included in the original application. Some examples are informed consents for participants with disabilities that are adapted to, for example, blind people or other kinds of disabilities. And for example, if you are working with sensitive personal data, you may want to include as well in your application how you are planning to anonymize that data in a sound manner. Last but not least, you need to plan ethical oversight. Consider appropriate ethical oversight at the institutional and project level. This is normally done by ethics committees at your host institution or perhaps regional and even national level. Establish an ethical review framework, possibly through ethics committees or other structures, and tell us which committee is going to review your planned experimentation, how often they are going to check that everything is in place, what are the members. All that information help us to understand how aware you are and how secure is the research, the innovative research that you are planning. It also demonstrate long-term commitment to ethical standards. Right, so these are the 5 steps that we invite you to take when writing your application and reflecting on the ethical aspects. Now let me show you some more practicalities on how you can show these reflections. So the ethical part of your ERC application, you can find it in part A, and it contains an ethics issue table, as mentioned by my colleague Laura before. This table is divided in 10 categories according to the most common ethics issues that we find in ERC research. Each of these categories has multiple questions, subcategories, and for some of them, we are going to ask you to provide some additional information. For instance, if you are planning to use animals, you need to tell us which species. Or if you are planning to import materials or data from non-EU countries, you will also need to tell us what type of material or data and from which country outside the EU. Now, perhaps the most important part of the ethics section is the ethics self-assessment, which is divided in 2 sections. First, you need to detail the ethical dimension of the objectives. This is basically the reflection that you have gone through in the 5 steps that I just introduced you. So the ethical issues, the need, the legal frameworks, the risk mitigation strategies, and so on. Then, of course, you have another part of the ethics self-assessment, that is the compliance with ethical principles and relevant legislation. Tell us which laws applies to your ethics, to your research, and how you are planning to comply with that regulation. Last but not least, you are also invited to add in your original application ethical annexes. These may be, for example, applications that you already have from the local ethics committee, or perhaps informed consents that you have already used for other projects. Do not hesitate. The same way that you can send us birth certificates for those of you that are asking for a change in the eligibility window, you can also add in the original application additional documents regarding ethics. Good. So regarding practical information, I would like to give you some tips here of things that we really appreciate when evaluating your proposals at the ethical level, based on the experience of, analyzing thousands of proposals every year. It's important that you include reflection on ethics right from the start. As I mentioned already many times, the ethics by design concept is really key for us. When you have doubts, always take the issue and elaborate on your doubts. Give us information that will allow us to differentiate between serious and complex ethics issues and non-serious and non-complex ethics issues. This is absolutely fundamental because with the arrival of the Horizon Europe program, we have changed the way we do ethics in the European Commission from a compliance-based approach to a trust-based approach. And in this trust-based approach that we currently use, our focus is only on serious and complex ethics issues. So the obvious question is, what constitutes serious and complex ethics issues? And you will see at the end of my presentation, which, by the way, we will share with all of you, relevant guidelines to identify whether or not the ethics issues that your research entails are considered serious and complex. And last but not least, as I mentioned before, include relevant annexes and check the guidelines. This is important. Read the guidelines. We have plenty of materials available in our website. Don't hesitate to ask if you have more questions. Now, we also have seen common mistakes when addressing the ethical part of your research, and I would like to give you some of them so that hopefully we can help you to avoid those. Don't think that issues depend on the general domain of your research. It is very common that if you are working on, certain parts of social sciences where you need sensitive personal data, you tend to diminish the importance of using that data because everybody does it, everybody uses it. It's understood that you need them. Well, they are still an ethics issue. The same applies, for example, in life sciences when you have to use animals. It may be perfectly justified, but it cannot be ignored. Don't do it in the last 5 minutes before submission of your proposal, and this is very important for those of you thinking about starting grants. The time is coming, and you still have time, but don't do it in the last minute, please. And do not abstain from thinking that it will go unnoticed. Believe me, we have plenty of eyes looking at every single proposal that is going to be funded, so we will know. And it doesn't look if you are simply forgetting or ignoring some of the issues. Do not try to do the ethics assessment entirely by yourself. And that takes me to the next slide, which is that you are probably in a very good host institution that can support you to do all this. So you are not alone. You have typically the data protection officer to help you with anything that relates to personal data. There used to be a legal department in your host institution, and they have previous experience on how to deal with ethics issues of ERC grants or other grants. And please ask your colleagues. There might be other ERC grantees in your department, in your university, that can help you to navigate those ethical issues. On top of that, as I mentioned before, we provide lots of reference materials in our website. I would say the most important one is the guide on how to complete your ethics self-assessment that will take you step by step and category by category to inform you on what is needed. And the guidelines on identifying serious and complex ethics issues in EU-funded research. So as you can imagine, this is not specific for the ERC, but for all European-funded science programs. All right, so on top of that, you also have many more guidelines that are focused on very specific research activities. I invite you to check them all. If you have questions regarding ethics, you can also use the functional mailbox that are on the chat. And with that, I will finish my presentation, and I wish you all good luck.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. And Georgiana and Alejandro, I think you gave excellent presentations there, but they've generated a lot of questions. We have 77 questions, which are there. Since I see we're still over 850 online, I would suggest that we spend an extra 5 minutes, finish the webinar 5 minutes later, so we can get through as many of these questions as possible. But if there are any questions remaining which are unanswered during the webinar, including those which are asked to Laura to start off with, we will answer those in writing and post them on our website. So maybe if my colleagues can start sharing the Slido screen. And I see the first question is for you, Georgiana. Can an applicant without a current permanent position include the cost of their salary also for Consolidator? We mentioned for starting, also for Consolidator.
Yes, thank you, Martin. I guess it is the question is about the PI salary cost, and yes, the principal investigator's cost, even if it doesn't have a current permanent position, can be an eligible cost for the ERC grant.
Thank you. Then again, a question for you: are laptops and desktops eligible costs, or are they part of the overheads?
It depends. It depends, and that's a very good question. And you'll hear a lot from us the following. check with the host institution rules. This you will hear it a lot during granting, and of course is valid also when you're building up your budget, because if the host institution has as a rule to consider laptop and desktops as overheads, then they will remain as overheads. If the host institution rule foresees that those costs can be considered direct costs from the accounting point of view, and they are relevant for the project and they are needed for the project, and this is something that you are foresee in the resources, then they can remain, they can be as direct cost.
Thank you. The next question I will take: in Northern European countries with the funding, you can only hire 2 people apart from the PI. Will there be a change in the budget allowed related to personal costs in different countries in the future? This is something which the Scientific Council, which sets out the strategy for the ERCEA, is very aware of. You may have seen that they issued in January of last year a statement on their approach, what they want for the next framework programme, which was really highlighting 2 things: the number of proposals, which, as Laura indicated, we have proposals which pass through the funding and are considered as excellent, but we don't have funding available. And we need to have more funding to be able to fund more of those in the future. The second is exactly what this question sets out: the fact that we have not increased our standard grant amount since 2007. And of course, inflation has eaten into that quite a lot. So they've called for a doubling of the budget to cover for those amounts. Now, you may have seen the Commission has put forward their proposal for the next framework programme, also called Horizon Europe. And in there, the ERC budget that the Commission has proposed is practically doubled. I think it's a 96% increase rather than 100%. So if that proposal is accepted by the member states with the budget that's allowed, then certainly there will be allowance to have these higher individual grant amounts in the next framework programme from 2020 to 2028 onwards. So actually, I'd put the call to all of you that this is something which your member states need to support. And so make sure that this is understood with your host institutions, your universities that you work with, speaking to your politicians, both in research ministries and also in finance ministries. This need to defend the overall research budget. And I think it's something which is really important. So next question, Georgiana, again, lots for you on the budget. What's the best way to budget for personal costs from a collaborating institution? Should we add them as a new partner?
Thank you, Martin. It depends what the personnel will do. I assume there will be team members, so you have to define their implication. And if their implication is major in the core research tasks, then, and of course, think if the new institution, their employer would be also interested to work on the project, in the research, to be involved in the research, then the best way is to add them as a new beneficiary. That's the clearest way, because the new beneficiaries have equal rights and obligation like the host institution, in the sense of providing their own budget, managing their own resources, and they will declare later on in the reports their own costs incurred. But there are different ways. Personnel costs can be seconded. So there are different ways to appoint them into the project, depending on the implication on their employment status, and of course, if first of all, if you are going to claim costs for them. I assume yes, from this question, that you are going to claim costs for them.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I think, is to both you and to Laura. How do I distinguish between the budget justification information to include in the form and in B2?
I can start.
Maybe start you first.
Yes, thank you. So in the resources section, it is very important to structure the information clearly by cost category. So if you're planning to charge personnel cost, describe each of the subcategories: principal investigator, postdocs, how many, details about, I don't know, salary grids, implication, percentages of implication. It doesn't need to be very lengthy. As I said, there are 8,000 characters to include all the cost categories, but it needs to be structured. Whereas in the rest, in part B2, is rather, the focus is rather on how you're going to include and why do you need those resources for the project. So the focus in the resources section in part A is to describe those resources and the technicalities, like percentage of involvement, or what kind of equipment you are going to list, the equipment that you are going to need, or what kind of consumables, like in terms of big categories, like reagents or computers, if they fall under this category, so on and so forth. Whereas in part B2, you are rather describing them for the need into the project. Laura, correct me if I'm wrong.
You're perfectly right, Georgiana. I would just maybe give an example. In part B2, you may say, why do you need 3 PhD positions? Which tasks these people will develop? What are going to do the postdocs? At which moment they will start? Why do you need this piece of equipment? What do you have already in the lab? So it's really the why and the how, and you say, just to give a practical example of the things that you may include in part B2.
Thank you. Next question is open access and whether it's required to ask for funding for open access publishing, or can you just justify to publish open access in journals where the university pays the open access fee? Laura, maybe I come to you first and then to Georgiana. Is that okay?
Yeah, open access is an obligation for Eurozone Europe. You can publish in open access journals and you may ask for the funding to pay for this, or you may use open access platforms that need to be the ones that are recognized by the ERC. You may have a bit more information in the information for applicants, but basically these are eligible costs. And maybe Georgiana can say something more.
I will just complement saying that, of course, it is not required. It's not an obligation to ask for funding if it's funded from other sources or if it's covered by the host institution, but it is an eligible cost. You may ask for it. Of course, keep in mind that the fee is eligible only for publishing in full open access publishing venues. So for Horizon Europe, they are eligible only for the full open access publishing venues, not for hybrid or for others.
Thank you. Georgiana, back to you. Can a collaborator be paid even if they're host institutions outside of Europe?
Okay, just to make a distinction, first of all, for us, host institution is the one hosting and engaging the principal investigator, so where the project takes place, basically. The rest of the additional entities, they may be additional beneficiaries or third parties. We call them, in a broad term, additional beneficiaries. Okay, let's put it like this. So a collaborator can be placed outside Europe. In the work program, it is mentioned that beneficiaries outside of EU or associated country can participate in new projects if they bring scientific added value or they host team members. Again, it depends how much implication the other beneficiary will have into the project to establish whether it's going to be a new beneficiary, so an additional beneficiary, or these collaborators can be seconded. There are conditions of secondment for natural persons, so for employees from collaborators. These secondment conditions are, I mean, in general, the secondment says that it needs to be to work on the premises of the beneficiary under the same conditions, salary and working conditions as a normal employee. There is a set of conditions of Horizon Europe, let's say, describing under which possibilities a collaborator can second a person to work on the project. So it's not necessarily that if you have a collaborator from another institute, it needs to be additional beneficiary that institute. It can be even be a secondment, but there are certain conditions to be fulfilled. Check with the host institution in this respect.
Thank you. And I think that's good advice. Check with your host institution. If you have a really specific question which your host institution isn't able to answer, and this sounds like it probably is a really specific case, then this is the kind of question you can send to us in the functional mailbox we talked about. So Georgiana, question again for you, how to take into account the yearly increase in salaries?
Again, check with the host institution because they know the historical data of how much it increased in the past year for each of the salary grids and for each position. So it is something, a very good example to get yourself guided from the host institution, from the financial department, on how to foresee this this yearly increase.
Thank you. And we, as I said before, we'll take an extra 5 minutes to answer some more questions. So I knew we are due to finish now, but we'll take this extra 5 minutes. Alejandro, I'll come to you. It's not the top question anymore, but I think it's the first one on ethics we've seen. It's a bit difficult to understand what ethical concerns to take care of while training AI models on data that's not ethically sensitive. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, with pleasure. Let me say that it's also a bit difficult for us to judge the developments of AI, especially in these models. I would say you just have to apply the basic principles of AI: ethics, transparency, fairness and equality, accountability, and human-centric approach. I understand that you are referring to a mathematical model in which no personal data is being used, and that typically doesn't raise significant ethics issues. But as usual, just explain your approach and try to detail as much as possible how your algorithm is going to work.
Thank you. And Georgiana, the next question is the extent to which the budget can be modified after the project is accepted, or indeed, I guess, during the lifetime of the project, or we extend it that
Thank
way.
you for this question. It's very good. So like this, you understand that your job now at the proposal is very important, but the budget is just an estimation, and the project will take 5 years. So for advanced grant, for starting grant and consolidator grant, that is the actual cost form of grants, and for advanced grant, which is a lump sum, your job now is to best estimate, thinking that the project, of course, will last 5 years, and thinking what are the eligible costs. So if you define with the host institution which are the costs that you can claim because they are, as they are eligible, later on for starting and consolidator, so the actual cost model, if there are modifications, in most of the cases, they enter under the budget flexibility. That is, modifications are possible afterwards, because what you are going to claim as cost over the 5 years project, it will be the cost that you are going to incur in each of the reporting periods. So it is normal that they will change. You will need maybe more position of postdocs and less of students. You may modify them afterwards, or all of a sudden the price of that equipment is higher because for a certain reason, and you need to dedicate more money to that equipment. So all these kind of modifications are possible in actual cost type of project. What is fixed is the maximum EU contribution. So what is awarded by the panel, that is something which cannot be modified. So you cannot ask extra money afterwards once it is approved. But within that amount of money which is awarded in between budget categories, there is a big flexibility. There are certain categories like subcontracting or whatever you're externalizing to other entities, which is not the host institution, then this is something to discuss with your project officer to see which is the best way to take on board those collaborations, and this might be subject of amendments. But otherwise, the budget is flexible to be modified. When it comes to advanced grant, which is a lump sum type of grant, it is very important to estimate well the amount at the proposal. Once the maximum EU contribution is approved, like for all the grants, it cannot be modified, but the focus afterwards on the project during the project implementation will no longer be on the budget. So you may switch in between activities and costs as you consider useful for the project, considering the rules of the host institution. But from the ERC perspective, what will be important will be the job accomplished. So the scientific part, if it is accomplished or not, not the budget itself. So we are not going to talk about budget flexibility and budget modifications for an advanced grant, for a lump sum, once the maximum EU contribution is accepted, because the focus will no longer be on the budget, it will be on the scientific accomplishment of the work. Whereas for the actual cost, that is starting and consolidator, there, yes, there is job to be done during project implementation with a project officer in the sense of this budget flexibility. In a nutshell, yes, you can modify the budget after the project is approved, keeping in mind that the maximum EU contribution cannot be modified.
Okay, maybe time for one more question. So over to you, Alejandro. For the ethics self-assessment, do I need to provide any additional documents, or is it enough to answer the ethics questions in Part A?
In short, no, you do not need to provide any additional documents. You are obviously invited, encouraged to do so if you have the documents. And this is connected to another question that I saw before, whether or not you need to have an ethics approval, for example, for animal research before you apply for an ERC grant. No, you do not need to have the approval before. You need to have the approval, of course, before the research activity. And you do not need to provide all these documents that are suggested in the guidelines on how to complete your ethics self-assessment. Of course, this has to be evaluated on a case by case. Let's imagine, for example, that you're working with very sensitive personal data and you are about to make a profiling, systematic profiling of individuals. In that particular case, you may have already consulted with your data protection officer, and he or she can provide an opinion on the risk of using that data. A data protection impact assessment, those type of things, those are things that are really encouraged to analyze your research and your awareness, but they are not needed. They are just a plus.
Okay, thank you. I know we still have 74 questions. Georgiana, sorry, you want to?
Yes, may I just briefly reply to the one which is the first one, because it complements actually the first one which was asked, can I include my full salary in the budget even if I commit only 30% of my time to the project? It somehow complements the first question that it was asked on the budget. So similar, like for all the costs that you're including in the budget, they are only the ones which are linked to the project. So if you cannot include your full salary into the budget, if you only commit 30%, you can include in the budget only the salary cost up to the percentage of the time that you dedicate to the project. And this is valid for all the rest of the cost categories and for the personnel cost, all the other team members, and for the rest of the cost category. So only what is needed for the project and up to the percentage of usage into the project. The same with the time commitment.
Thanks very much. And I think that was a really valuable last addition. Very, very clear. Thank you, Georgiana. Now, I realize there's still 72 questions to answer. Don't worry, we will answer these in writing and post them on our website. And there was about 20 questions from the previous questions and answers, which we still need to answer. So they will appear on our website in the coming days. Give us some time to answer those, but don't worry, we will answer all of your questions after the webinar. So I would like to thank you all for attending. I see we're still almost 700 online, so thank you very much for that and your interest, and we look forward to seeing your proposals. I would like to thank Laura, Georgiana, and Alejandro for their presentations, and also Rosaria and John, who are the two members from my team behind the scenes who you've not seen, but they've been controlling all the webinar and the questions in Slido. The recording of this webinar and all of the presentations will be available in the coming days on the ERC website, so keep an eye out for those. It'll be probably before the end of the week. Then one thing which I'd like to highlight, we've all mentioned it at certain times, is remember your first point of contact is the national contact points. So if you have questions, write to them. They have a dedicated email addresses, and you can find the information in the information for applicants, and also on the funding and tender portals. So I think they really need to be your best friends if you have questions to and want to understand how best to address a particular part of the evaluation, the application, or understand more about the evaluation process. You can contact them directly. You can also contact us with specific questions by the email addresses we gave before. So with that, I would like to thank you all. I would ask you to spend just a few more minutes, if possible, to go to Slido again and provide us with some feedback on this session. It's always useful to get your feedback. There are a few questions in Slido, and the poll in Slido will remain open after the webinar, so you don't need to complete it just now, but I'd encourage you to do it so we get your feedback immediately. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. We look forward to receiving your applications in due course. And with that, a very good end of the morning from here in Brussels. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Good luck. Thank you.
Good luck.